Hi guys, I'm Judy Elmore and I'm a freelance editor with Black Wolf Editorial Services. Over the past few weeks, we have been talking about various different aspects of editing, the stages of editing, some of the editing tricks I use. We talked about show versus tell, and of course, most recently, we've talked about depth of perception. Today, I want to talk about a very specific editorial tool that I use myself within my own writing. I want to talk about, in particular, the editorial synopsis. Now, I can imagine quite a few of you just heard that word synopsis and have gone screaming. She wants us to do a synopsis? Is she crazy? Is she mad? No. You can calm down for a moment and just pay attention. Because trust me, the editorial synopsis, you were probably already doing it, but didn't really know what it was. So what exactly is a synopsis? Well, according to the Merriam-Webster Dictionary, a synopsis is a condensed statement or outline as of a narrative or a treatise. Okay, that's big words. What does this really mean? Well, a synopsis is a spoiler alert. It contains all plot points from start to finish. That's what it simply is. It reveals a story plot arc and the pacing within the story, and it talks a little bit about some of the characters. Now, the reason why some of you are probably screaming is because a submission synopsis has very specific rules. It is only the main plot, it is only the main characters, as in your protagonist, your antagonist, and your sidekick, or the love interest, or some other minor character, and it has very specific formatting rules. Trust me, you can stop screaming now, because what we're talking about today is not the submission synopsis. We are talking about the editorial synopsis. While the editorial synopsis is similar, it is not a submission synopsis. I have to stress that right now. It contains all your plot points from start to finish, all your main plot points, as well as your subplot points. And there's a very specific reason why the subplot points need to be present. It's not restricted to just the main characters. It can have these other little characters that come along the way. There is no specific formatting. Formatting, be gone! There is none. I have seen some editorial synopses in bulleted lists, which is how I tend to do them. I've also seen people do them as mind maps. I've seen people write them as actual paragraph treatments. I've seen them as loosely connected sentences and dialogue. I do that myself. I've seen them written as a short story that's all in tell with no fun bits. You know what? The structure of an editorial synopsis is entirely up to you as the writer, because, you know what? It contains all the information that you need as a writer. It's not for anyone else to see it. For all anyone really cares, that thing can be sacrificially burned if you really want to when you finish your editing cycle. Most of you are probably already doing an editorial synopsis in one way or another, but you don't call it an editorial synopsis. You might call it a summary or a digest or an outline or an overview. There are so many different names out there for it. Let's give you an example. Let's take Cinderella. Most people already know the core story of Cinderella. Now, I'm not going to go into the subplots on this because, well, it depends on what version are you talking. Are you talking the original Brother Grimm story, or are you talking some other story? The first plot point that happens, Cinderella's father remarries a woman with 2 daughters. After which, her father dies, and Cinderella becomes a slave within her own home. But somehow she goes to the ball and she dances with the prince. But something happens and she runs away from the ball and she leaves behind her shoe. Seriously, with the cost of shoes, especially if they were glass slippers, why would she want to leave behind her shoe? But that's what she does. And the prince searches the kingdom for her and finds her because of the shoe. And of course, Cinderella marries the prince. Now, whether it's a happily ever after or not will depend on your particular retelling treatment of the story. There is a lot more to the Cinderella story than just this. But for an editorial synopsis, finding the gaps in your plot and finding your pacing, this is what is needed. You don't actually need to go into any more depth if you don't want to. That's the niceties about an editorial synopsis. Okay, so why do I find an editorial synopsis so valuable? Well, an editorial synopsis can help you in finding the core story. What backstory is important to that core story? You will always have within any story structure, you will always have this main story thread, and then you might have little subplots coming off of it. But the question is are you spending too much time on that subplot, and hence your pacing of your main character arc is off? It allows you to look at the pacing of your main character story or the main story itself, whatever, if you're doing character or a plot driven story. It allows you to look at it and look at those beat points and say, am I hitting my mark or is it taking too long? Are you putting too much emphasis into a subplot that really isn't necessary? Are you deviating away from your main story for too far? An editorial synopsis will help you ensure that you have completed that main arc, because there is nothing worse than reading a book and you're like, where's the rest of the story? You need to have that main arc within the story complete. This is particularly helpful when you're working in a series, especially if it's a main over arc story, where from one story to the next you have a little section of adventure that all adds up to the main story. It allows you to work out where your sub-arcs are, so you can still have a completed arc within each book, but you have the overall arching of the story. It can help you to find where you could split a story. I'll give you a quick example on this one. It was within my own novel. I was working on a high fantasy story, and I had so much on it. There was literally, I kid you not, this manuscript was over 300,000 words by the time I finished it. I was like, oh wow, that's a bit much. And I took a look at the editorial synopsis and I went, bingo, right there is the point where I need to split it. And it wasn't quite halfway through. It was actually more closer to around about, I don't know, probably, it was just over halfway. It wasn't quite 2/3, but it was just over halfway. And I went, right, that's the point where I split the story. At which point I took a good in-depth look at the story itself up to that point and went, how can I shift this to make it feel like a completed story? And that's what the editorial synopsis is for. It can help you work out what scenes are important and what ones aren't. And trust me, there were a lot of scenes within my editorial synopses that I look at them and go, you know what, that entire subplot thread is just a waste of time. It's nice, but why am I doing it? And this is the sort of thing you get from the editorial synopsis. It ensures that any of the changes that you make stay true to your main plot points. You don't want to be deviating too far from your main plot if you can avoid it. Editorial synopses are also really useful when you are working with a developmental editor in particular, such as myself, because it allows us to see where you want your story to go. When I'm working with mentoring clients, I always get my clients to work through an editorial synopsis. So at least that way they know where they want their story to go. And trust me, the editorial synopsis that they will write, it may only contain 5 bullet points. Where it starts, where it ends, and a couple of points in the middle. And that's it. But at least they have an idea of where the story has to go. And that's the value of this. A little hidden value is that an editorial synopsis can actually help you generate a submission synopsis if you need one. Now I have to stress that because not everyone's going to need one. Do you work with an editorial synopsis or not? Do you do this? Well, I strongly believe that all writers can benefit from an editorial synopsis, but if it makes you feel better, call it by a different name. Call it by an outline. Call it by a plot treatise. Call it by, I don't care what you call it, just call it something. But you are going to be looking at your overall plot structure. It's important. Plotters, and those are the type of writers that have to have all the details down before they actually start writing, they will actually have an editorial synopsis before they start. But they won't call it necessarily an editorial synopsis. It will be their character sheets, it'll be their plot outline, it'll be all of that sort of thing. Pantsers, yeah, most pantsers will probably write an editorial synopsis after they write their first draft. And that's when I tend to write mine. I'll have my first draft done and I'll look at it and go, these are my core plot points. This is what I need to be looking at. And, this needs to shift in here. So I use it for pacing as well. The most important thing is with an editorial synopsis is to remember that it is an editing tool. So you use as much information as you need for your editing style and your editing process. And like I said before, if you need one, you can use an editorial synopsis to build the submission synopsis. In our next video, we're going to talk about pacing. We're going to talk a little bit about the traditional 3-act structure, and which seems to be morphing into more of a 4-act structure these days. We're going to talk a little bit about Save the Cat, but we're actually going to talk a little bit more about using sentences and paragraphs and looking at how we can improve the pacing so we can control the rate at which a reader will read our story. That video should be available in the next couple of days. In the meantime, if you have any questions about this or any of the other topics that we have discussed so far in the What Next video series, please feel free to contact me. You can contact me via Twitter, and that's at blackwolf_ed, or you can contact me via Facebook, and that's Black Wolf Editorial, or you can find me through my website, and that's blackwolfeditorial.com. Alternatively, if you are interested in my personal projects, you can check me out on Twitter, and that's at Judy L. Moore, or you can find me through my website, and that's judylmoore.com. Meanwhile, I look forward to helping you take your writing to the next level.